It's dark. The world sleeps. No footsteps. No voices. No noise. Just you. Awake. Again. You glance at the clock. 3:27 a.m. You don't know why, but something pulled you out of sleep. Not fear, not restlessness. Something else. And maybe, just maybe, it's not an accident. Maybe you were never meant to sleep through this hour. Because some awakenings don't come with alarm clocks. They come with silence, with a stirring, with a whisper in your soul that says, "Get up, there's something you're meant to hear." So, before you dismiss it, before you roll over and go back to the safe, numb rhythm of routine, listen. Because if you're waking up between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m., you've just stepped into one of the most powerful windows of your life. And what you do now could change everything. Everything. The sacred hour is not a coincidence, it's a calling. You didn't wake up at this hour by accident. That time on the clock somewhere between 3 and 5 in the morning, it wasn't random. It wasn't just the body shifting in bed or some meaningless interruption in your sleep cycle. No, it was something deeper, something ancient. A presence, a pulse, a frequency that doesn't care for the logic of schedules or alarms. That moment you opened your eyes, that was an invitation. This hour, quiet, cold, mysterious, has been revered for centuries. Before the noise of civilization, before electricity, before distractions poured into every waking second of our lives, this time belonged to those who listened. Warriors, mystics, philosophers. They knew. They understood something we've forgotten. That the stillest hours of the night are when the soul speaks the loudest. Not in language, not in words, but in sensation. In instinct. In the quiet pressure behind your chest that tells you, get up. You weren't pulled from sleep because you're broken. You weren't disturbed because something is wrong with you. It's not stress or anxiety or overthinking. It's not restlessness, it's readiness. Read that again. Read it slowly. You're ready. Ready to receive what you've been too distracted to notice during the day. Ready to face what you've been avoiding. Ready to step into your own clarity without the fog of the world muting your thoughts. This hour is sacred not because of what's happening outside of you, but because of what can happen within you if you're willing. Most people won't understand this. They'll tell you to go back to sleep, that it's not healthy to be up at this hour, that you need to be well rested. And maybe that's true some nights. But then there are nights like this, rare and precise, when you're being woken up by something older than science. And that kind of awakening doesn't care how many hours of sleep you got. It cares if you're paying attention. This is the hour when your truest self is unsupervised. No audience, no mask, no performance. Just the raw, undiluted version of you. And in that space you can feel what's real. You can hear the whisper of truth beneath all the noise. You can ask questions that daylight makes you afraid to answer. Who are you really? What are you running from? What are you being called toward? And what would happen if you stopped ignoring that call? Every great transformation begins in silence. And this right now is your silence. Not empty, not lifeless, not void. Alive. Powerful. Charged with something almost supernatural. You don't need a reason to trust it. You don't need a theory or a study to confirm what you already know. You feel it. And that feeling, that subtle pressure, that sense that something wants your attention, that's the calling. And if you answer it, if you sit in the dark and listen, really listen, you'll find something waiting for you there. Not a voice from the sky, not thunder or lightning, just clarity, just presence, just the strange peace that comes when you finally stop running and realize this hour wasn't trying to disturb you. It was trying to wake you up to yourself. Silence isn't empty, it's full of answers. There's something unnerving about the silence at that hour. It's not the kind of silence you find in the afternoon, when people are busy and you're just alone. It's not the silence of a quiet room filled with the hum of electricity or the distant sound of traffic. No, this silence is thick. It wraps around you like a second skin. It breathes with you. It doesn't just sit in the air, it presses into you, almost like it's watching, waiting, studying you to see if you're ready to face what you've avoided for too long. Most people fear this kind of silence because it forces them to sit with themselves. In the daytime, there's always a distraction ready to save you: a text message, a meeting, a screen, a noise. You can drown out the discomfort with movement, with busyness, with voices that don't mean anything but keep your mind occupied. But when you're awake between 3 and 5, and the whole world has gone quiet, there's nowhere left to run. The silence becomes a mirror. It shows you what you really are beneath the surface, and not everyone is ready for that kind of honesty. But here's the strange thing: buried within that discomfort is something sacred. The silence at that hour isn't trying to punish you. It's trying to reveal something to you. It's trying to speak in a language that only makes sense when everything else goes still. The problem is we've been taught to equate silence with absence, that if nothing is being said, then nothing is happening. But that couldn't be further from the truth. Silence isn't empty, it's full. Full of everything you've ignored, every question you were too distracted to ask, every truth you've buried under convenience and noise. It holds the weight of your past, your choices, your pain, not to haunt you, but to offer you the chance to understand them. The answers you're looking for, they don't come through the chaos. They don't arrive in a hurry. They don't announce themselves with flashing lights and loud voices. They wait, patiently, inside that stillness. And the reason you keep waking up at this hour might be because your soul is tired of being drowned out. It's been trying to tell you something, but it needed to wait until the world was quiet enough for you to hear it. There's something incredibly healing about sitting in that kind of silence without reaching for something to break it. When you resist the urge to turn on a light, to scroll through your phone, to distract yourself, and instead just sit, breathe, and listen, that's when the real conversation begins. Not the one with your thoughts that race and loop, but the one underneath them. The deeper knowing. The calm voice within that doesn't scream for attention but gently waits for you to tune in. You don't need to force it. You don't need to analyze it. Just being in that silence, letting it wash over you without fear, is an act of trust. It's an act of courage. Because most people will never allow themselves that kind of closeness with their own mind. But you've already woken up. Something in you is already searching. And the silence you're stepping into now, it isn't there to torment you. It's there to teach you. Let it speak. Because if you stay long enough and listen without trying to control what comes next, you might discover that everything you've been asking for has been waiting for you here all along. Prepare the mind before it's polluted by the world. There's a moment that comes just before the world wakes up, not the physical world, but the mental one. The one that rushes in the second you look at your phone, the instant you check your messages or scroll through endless feeds filled with opinions, obligations, comparisons, and chaos. That moment, if you're not careful, disappears in a heartbeat. And when it does, something important is lost: the chance to set your own rhythm before the world sets it for you. Waking between 3 and 5 isn't just an odd sleep pattern, it's an opportunity to protect the most sacred part of your day, the beginning. In those fragile minutes, your mind is untouched, unburdened by what everyone else thinks, expects, or demands. But most people throw that moment away without realizing it. They reach for stimulation before reflection, distraction before direction. They let the external world crash in before even checking in with themselves. You have to understand something: the world is loud, but it's not wise. It doesn't care if you're grounded, if you're centered, if you're moving with purpose. It only cares that you're moving, that you're consuming, that you're reacting. And once it pulls you in, it rarely lets you go without a fight. That's why this window, this quiet hour, must be claimed before it's stolen. The mind, fresh from sleep, is vulnerable, not weak, but open. In those first moments of wakefulness, you're in direct contact with your inner world. Your subconscious is still near the surface. The noise hasn't filled the room yet. And what you feed yourself in that state, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, it matters more than you think, because it sets the tone for everything that follows. If you wake and immediately pour in the worries of the day, the opinions of others, the anxieties hiding in headlines and notifications, you are letting your mind be shaped before you've even had the chance to shape it yourself. Instead, that time should be guarded like a fortress. It's not a time for checking emails or diving into the stress you fell asleep trying to escape. It's a time to be intentional. Breathe. Be still. Reflect on what you want this day to mean, not what it demands of you, but what you demand of it. Maybe that means journaling. Maybe it means praying. Maybe it means sitting in silence with a question you don't yet have the answer to. Whatever it is, it must come from within you, not from outside of you. Because once the external world floods in, it becomes 10 times harder to hear your own voice. This early hour gives you the power to take control of your mental climate before the storm hits. It lets you decide what kind of energy you'll carry, what kind of presence you'll embody, what kind of person you'll choose to be. And that's not just poetic, it's practical. Because the quality of your mind determines the quality of your responses. And your responses? They shape your reality. When the world begins to wake, it does so in a frenzy: headlines shouting, messages pinging, demands stacking up by the minute. But if you've already met yourself in the stillness, if you've already planted your intentions deep in the soil of clarity, then none of that frenzy can shake you. You won't be dragged into the current, because you've already anchored yourself. This hour is your shield. It is your preparation. And once you learn to honor it, you'll stop waking up to survive the day and start waking up to lead it. Write what you hear in the dark. There are truths that will never show themselves in daylight, not because they fear the light, but because the noise of the world is too loud for them to survive in it. These truths are fragile, delicate like breath on glass. They arrive quietly, not to impress you, not to make declarations, but to offer a glimpse, just a glimpse of something that could change everything if you choose to pay attention. And the hours between 3 and 5 in the morning are sacred precisely because those truths finally have the space to speak. You see, most people go their entire lives thinking they know themselves, when in reality, all they've done is memorize a version self that fits into everyone else's expectations. They mistake memory for identity, performance for personality. They confuse repetition with purpose. But when you wake in the middle of the night, stripped of roles, free from the opinions of others, untouched by deadlines and routines, that is when your truest self begins to stir. It doesn't shout. It doesn't announce itself. It simply is. And if you're still enough, quiet enough, honest enough, it will begin to speak. But the voice that emerges in the dark does not use the same language we use during the day. It speaks through images, through emotions, through flashes of memory and strange combinations of words that don't always make sense right away. It might show you a moment from childhood or a regret you buried so deep you forgot it had a name. It might whisper a dream you've denied, or offer you a sentence so simple yet so heavy, it lands in your chest like a stone dropped into water. And here's the most important part: if you don't write it down, you'll lose it. Not because it wasn't real, but because your waking life has been trained to forget anything that doesn't fit inside its narrow definition of important. That's why you must keep a journal nearby, always. Not a formal one. Not something polished or organized or meant to be read by anyone but you. A raw journal. A place to capture thoughts before they disappear into the noise. Because the thoughts you have at 3:47 a.m. are not the same thoughts you'll have at 9 in the morning. The person you are in that silence is not the same person who answers emails or gets stuck in traffic or scrolls through feeds pretending not to be disappointed by what they see. That person, the one awake in the dark, without armor, without noise, is the closest thing you'll ever meet to your soul. And when that version of you speaks, the most respectful thing you can do is write. Not to create art, not to produce content, but to preserve contact. Writing in the dark is not a performance. It's a form of remembering. It's a conversation between your conscious and unconscious selves, between who you pretend to be and who you actually are. And the only way to hold on to that conversation is to give it form, to shape it in ink or in keystrokes, before the logic of the day convinces you it never happened. Some people dismiss journaling as soft or sentimental, but they don't understand the purpose. They think writing is only useful when it's edited, structured, or meant for publication. But real writing, the kind you do for no one but yourself, is not about perfection. It's about honesty. It's about capturing the moment as it is, not as you wish it to be. It's about writing the thought exactly as it arrives, even if it's strange, even if it's messy, even if it makes no sense at all. Because the goal is not to create clarity right away. The goal is to preserve the raw material of insight so that clarity can come later. There will be nights when what you write scares you. There will be pages filled with anger, with grief, with desires you didn't know you carried. There will be sentences that seem too big for you, ideas that feel unfamiliar but undeniably yours. That is not a mistake. That is evidence. Evidence that your inner world is deeper than you imagined. That beneath all your routines and your rules and your daily to-do lists, there exists a part of you that is vast, wild, and alive, and that part of you has been waiting for your attention. And yet you'll be tempted to ignore it. You'll be tempted to tell yourself it doesn't matter, that you'll remember it later, that sleep is more important. But ask yourself, how many truths have you already forgotten because you were too tired, too distracted, too afraid to write them down when they arrived? How many moments of deep knowing have come and gone, never to return, simply because you didn't hold them in your hands long enough to recognize what they were? Writing at that hour is an act of self-respect. It is a decision to treat your inner life as something worthy of being recorded, not discarded. It is a quiet rebellion against the speed and superficiality of the world. And it doesn't require beauty. It doesn't require eloquence. All it requires is presence. You showing up to the page, ready to listen. You honoring the strange rhythm of your own awakening. In time, those midnight pages will become a map. Not a map that leads you somewhere external, but one that leads inward toward the truth of who you are and what you carry. You'll begin to see patterns. You'll notice what keeps returning. You'll recognize which dreams won't let go and which wounds still bleed beneath the surface. And that kind of self-awareness, that's not a luxury. That's survival. That's transformation. So the next time you wake in the stillness of early morning and feel something stirring in your chest, don't turn away. Don't let that moment slip into the forgetfulness of habit. Reach for the pen, find the page, and write what you hear in the dark before the light comes and makes you forget that you ever knew it. Rise before the world to rise above it. There is a quiet power in being the first to rise. Not for the sake of productivity, not to prove something to the world or to run faster in the race everyone else is obsessed with. No, this kind of rising is different. It's not about speed or efficiency or achievement. It's about alignment. It's about positioning your soul before the noise of the world has a chance to pull it in 20 different directions. It's about setting the tone of your being before the demands of the day dilute your essence into something unrecognizable. To rise before the world is to return to yourself while the air is still untouched, while the streets are still sleeping, while the minds of millions have not yet awakened into frenzy. There's a kind of reverence in that, a sacred space where you and your breath are the only things that matter. And when you choose to rise in that space, to stand in it fully awake, while the rest of the world sleeps, you are making a declaration, not out loud, but deep within your spirit, that you refuse to be led by chaos, that you will not wait for the world to define you before you've defined yourself. When most people wake, they don't rise, they react. Their first breath is not a conscious one. It's a reflex triggered by alarms and pressure. They check their phones before they check their pulse. They reach for obligations before they reach for peace. And from that very first moment, they are swept into a current they no longer control. The day drags them, pulls them, tosses them from one task to the next, and by the time they come home, they've forgotten what they even stood for in the first place. But those who rise in the hours before the world begins its march, they don't get swept away as easily, because they've already met themselves before the world tried to sell them a false version. There is an invisible advantage in this kind of waking, not the kind that others will see right away, but the kind that becomes obvious over time. You begin to think differently. You start to respond rather than react. Your thoughts become less frantic, your emotions less easily hijacked by triggers and trivialities. You notice the small things that others miss, the way your mind feels after stillness, the difference between intention and compulsion, the sound of your own conscience when no one else is talking over it. And slowly that inner clarity becomes something unshakable. Not perfect, but rooted. And in a world that is constantly trying to uproot you, that's not just rare, it's revolutionary. But this rising is not easy, and it was never meant to be. Because what you're doing isn't just waking up early. What you're doing is separating yourself from a rhythm that's designed to keep you asleep, not physically, but spiritually, emotionally, consciously. You're stepping out of the machinery that runs on urgency and fear and endless consumption. And instead, you're building your life from the inside out. That kind of life doesn't start at 9 a.m., when the meetings begin and the screens light up. It starts in the dark, when no one is watching, when there is no applause to chase, no validation to collect, just you and the decision to begin with intention. Some mornings you will wake up and feel resistance in your bones. The warmth of your bed will whisper that comfort is more important than growth. Your tired body will argue that sleep is sweeter than stillness. And there will be days when it wins. But the truth is, this practice was never about perfection. It's about consistency. It's about returning. Again and again. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Because every time you rise while the world sleeps, you're not just getting a head start, you're building something sacred within yourself. Discipline without cruelty, stillness without stagnation, presence without pressure. And that presence begins to spill into the rest of your life. You carry it into conversations. You bring it into conflicts. You move through the noise without absorbing it. You begin to live with a kind of centeredness that no one can quite put their anger, but everyone can feel. And that feeling, that energy, is not something you can fake. It only comes from doing the inner work when no one else is looking, from choosing to face yourself when distraction is easier, from choosing clarity over comfort, intention over impulse, soul over schedule. You'll find that when you rise before the world, your relationship with time begins to shift. You're no longer ruled by the ticking of the clock. You begin to create time instead of chase it. You realize that the world will always move fast, but you don't have to. That success doesn't always belong to the one who runs hardest, but often to the one who sees clearly, who acts from alignment rather than adrenaline. And when others begin their day already exhausted by the sprint to catch up, you've already grounded yourself in peace. You've already met your thoughts in silence. You've already set your direction, not by chance, but by choice. There's a quiet kind of power in walking into the day, knowing that you've already touched the eternal. That before the emails, before the voices, before the noise, you listened to something older than fear. You moved with something more ancient than anxiety. You remembered who you are before the world tried to tell you who you should be. And that memory, that reconnection, becomes your compass. Not just for the day, but for the life you are slowly, deliberately building from the ground up. So rise before the world. Not to race it, but to rise above it. Not to beat it, but to transcend it. Not to dominate it, but to no longer be dominated by it. Rise to meet the version of you that lives beneath the layers of performance. Rise to meet the part of you that already knows what matters. Rise not because it's easy, but because you are ready to lead from a place most will never even think to look. Rise because now you finally understand the real world doesn't begin with noise, it begins with silence.